Welcome to the Hardwood Hustle, powered by PGC Basketball. We believe in the value of a coach. We're here to educate, empower, and encourage you to lead like never before. This week's conversation is about maximizing your offense by playing out of the post in a variety of personnel situations. Whether you have a dominant post player, no post players, or even someone in between, TJ and Sam cover off all three scenarios. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Hardwood Hustle. And for those of you that are first-time listener, thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to do a little X's and O's talk. Specifically, we're going to talk about how to use the post player in your system. I think this is one that coaches are constantly trying to figure out is, what do I do with the post player? So we're going to break it down like this, Sam. We're going to talk about the different types of post players, and we're going to cover every category a coach might be in. I'm going to talk about the two extremes first, right? You've got a dominant post player. What do you do in that scenario? The second scenario is you have no post player. Let's just say you're a really small team. You don't want anybody to play the post. And then the third category we'll talk about is an in-between post player, like maybe serviceable at something. Maybe they're big and they need to play inside, but you don't really want them to get the ball. So you're somewhere in between the dominant post player, no post player. And then the in-between is somebody that needs to be down there but can't really do a whole lot down there. Maybe there's a few things that they can do. Those are the three types of post players we're going to talk about and how to use them in your offense. And again, we're not going to talk specific systems and strategies. That's going to be, you as a coach are going to determine what fits in your offense, what doesn't fit in your offense. But first of all, I want to talk about the biggest mistake I think coaches do make, and that is saying we're going to run this offense no matter what, and they don't have the post player to be able to run that. They just are not capable, and we're running a particular offense, and the post player is everything's run through them, but they can't score and they can't pass. Well, that doesn't make any sense. And so I think you got to bail on that one pretty quickly. If your systems and strategies, whatever offense you're running, doesn't give you an opportunity to make that person useful. I think good offense, we're using all five players on the floor in some way, not to the same degree. It's not, 20% for each player on the floor, but in some way they're serviceable and they help our offense be better. So let's start with the first one, Sam. You got a dominant post player. Now, I know this is not a problem a lot of coaches have, but some of us out there have the dominant post player. We won't spend forever on this one because if you got one, it does make the game easier. But again, most people don't have a dominant post player, and I think that the post has gotten a little bit different. Has changed. The post players just changed. I think we've gone positionless basketball. I don't know if we're grooming back to the basket post players anymore like maybe we once did. But if we did have a dominant post player, Sam, what are some keys to using that player well?
Yeah, I want to touch on, why don't we have it first, CJ, and I'll answer that question. But the game has evolved. If you look at since 2015 when Steph Curry really opened up the game and it changed from all levels. So a lot of bigs are shooting more threes, and it's not as methodical. You turn on an NBA game from the 80s and you turn it on in today's, and it's like two different games you wouldn't even recognize. And so it doesn't mean one's right and one's wrong, or something's bad and something's not, something's good. But what do you do if you have a dominant post player? Well, you play through them because they're dominant, just like any other player. If you have a dominant player, you want to play through them. They'll attract double teams. They'll make good decisions. They're a good one-on-one player. And so the key is then designing your system around them, whether that's, spacing out shooters or sending cutters off of them. If they can pass, you think of, again, I'm using NBA examples because that's what, most people would recognize, but like a Jokic or an Embiid at the NBA level, and they're two different players. So you got to play through them, TJ. I guess we can talk about how you do that, but that's the short answer.
Yeah, Don Meyer used to say this, and, again, game has changed. This was been 20 years ago or whatever, but he used to say, give me a post player that demands a double team and four players around him that can shoot, and you've got offense. I mean, that plain and simple is if you do have that post player, it's a rarity, and you got to figure out how to get him the ball. It's not easy. I mean, a lot of times when you have a dominant post player, you're going to see different schemes. You're going to see a lot of people trying to front that post player, take him away, not get touches down there. But if you do have that dominant post player, I think it'd be a big mistake not to play through them, not to get a player. We talk about all the time, even on the perimeter, the essence of good offense is being able to engage two defenders and make the right read. And so if we can get 2 people to the ball, that means we're playing 4-on-3. And so if we have a post player that's down there and they're left 1-on-1 and they can get a bucket at 60% rate, you want to go to them every single time. Well, if they're getting at 60% rate, you're going to start getting doubles, you're going to start getting fronts. But at the end of the day, both of those to some degree bring a second defender to the ball, or at least to the receiver. And so you should have numbers somewhere else on the perimeter. So I think that that's sometimes easier said than done. I think somebody that has a dominant post player can also force it so much in there that they turn the ball over, throwing it to bad situations. But I would have spent a lot of time on how we're going to get it there, whether it's we cross screen to get them the ball or we roll them off ball screens. We're trying to put them in situations besides just standing on the block. Because a lot of times if you have a dominant post player and they just stand on the block, that is easy for the defense to scheme against. But it's harder when you cross screen them to the ball. It's harder when they set a ball screen and you roll them back and then you feed them the ball. Like the defense isn't set. The coverage isn't as easy. So sometimes you have to be creative. But I think you're right. At the end of the day, if you have a dominant post player and they're scoring 60% around the rim, why would you not give them the ball? And then the next level of that is if they're scoring 60% and they get the ball, they're going to see a lot of different coverages. Do they have the ability to make good reads out of that? And does the rest of your offense complement that? You also hit on that point of, do you have cutters to the rim? Do you have good spacing on the perimeter? Do you allow for easy reads once 2 players come to the ball? That's really important.
Well, and the flip side, the curse of a dominant post player or a dominant player, the curse of it is you go to them too much and you become so reliant on them, and you keep feeding that, that engine, and then you get into postseason play and better coaching, better defensive schemes, and they take away your one go-to and you don't have the counters. That's the curse of a dominant player that, it's a really tough decision as a coach because you want to play through your better players. I just always enjoyed coaching more balanced teams where they didn't know where we were coming with it. And we played through our better players, but at the same time, there was just balance across the roster and across the floor. You have that with this year, I think, with a wing player. So I think that's one thing you got to be aware of is it's not black and white. It's not a science. It's an art. Like, yeah, play through them, but then do you have other go-tos? Do you have counters? Do you have other ways of getting it done in foul trouble or when schemes are starting to take away that? And there's an evolution to any player and any offense that once they take it away against, good teams, good coaches will do that. And then how do you counter what they're doing to your go-to?
Yeah. And that's a good point there, Sam. I think that when you have a dominant player, no matter what position they play, it's always tricky for a coach because that player needs the ball more. And so I always think of it as plan A and plan B. Plan A is to play through our best player. If our best player can constantly win drives in space and make the right read, you want them to do that as many times as possible. If your post player can catch it down there and score it on a single team and kick it out of there on a double team, you want to play through that as much as you possibly can. But there's got to be the plan B. Like when that's not there and teams sell out to the head of the snake and they try and take away what you do best, can your team still function? Can they still play really good high-level basketball when that player can't be as involved or that player gets the ball out of their hands? Let's just say they're, good wing player and they get doubled on every ball screen. Well, can you still play out of that? And if it's a post player and they get doubled, can you still play out of that? And so I think it's important for coaches to have that plan A, like as much as possible. We want to go to this situation because we think we're going to score it at a high rate. But what if that doesn't happen? What if that does get taken away? What if we can't feed that player? What if they double that player every time? You got to have good counters. And I think it's a really hard thing to coach. I was just sitting at breakfast having a talk with some retired coaches and we were talking about that very thing, is that you can get into a rut and not have responsibilities and counters when things are different. So like one game you can go out there, especially with young kids, and you're setting side ball screens and you're either rolling and getting a drop-off layup or you're driving to the rim and getting a bucket. That defensive coverage isn't good. And the next game, the defensive coverage is good. And they start hedging it. And you got to do something different. And then later on in the game, they drop coverage. And later on in the game, they ice it. Now you got different coverages. You got to have counters. You got to have answers. So if you're going to play through somebody, you got to have counters to all the things the other team might be doing against you. You can't stop at having success on one game, because if one team's watching film or they scouted you in some way, they're going to take away what you did best. So I think having counters is really important, especially when you have a dominant post player.
Well, I don't know if this is apples to apples comparison, but I think we've even talked about it on here, but Draymond Green talked about when Steve Kerr took over the coach of the Warriors, he wanted to play a free-flowing, ball movement offense and not this heavy ball screen pin down for Clay and Steph that existed before he took over. And one practice, Draymond stops and he's like, hey, we got to, Kerr kept saying, swing the ball, move it. And he's like, Coach, Steph's our best player, our best shooter. Why do you keep telling him to swing the ball? And Kerr said, well, I found that the best player ends up taking the most shots anyways. And that's somebody who come and play with Michael Jordan. And I think a lot of people who listened to this show, who listened to our Hardwood Hustle, TJ, they may have not watched Jordan. But when there was an evolution of a dominant player, and Jordan, when Phil Jackson took over the Bulls, he had to tell Jordan, hey, you can still lead the league in scoring, but you may not score 37, 38. You've got to let the game come to you, because Jordan was so dominant and knew he was so good. He forced his will from beginning to end, and other guys would get stagnant. So this is a part of this conversation where, like, if you feed it every play all day, every day, other players may not be bought into that role. And Jordan had to learn to let the game come to him. Sometimes he might go for 50 and bring it for 4. Sometimes he might score 18 in the fourth quarter. But like Kobe Bryant had to learn that. He forced his will. Phil Jackson had a lot of frustration with Kobe coaching him, because he thought Kobe didn't let it come to him, and he's trying to play through Shaq, and Kobe's shooting all these shots, and that was a frustrating period of time for Phil. So my point in saying all those examples is, even if you have a dominant player, teaching your dominant player how to impose their will, how to get others involved, like that's a hard thing for a player to learn how to do. But I think coaches have to teach them how to do it.
Yeah, it is very difficult. So, when you have a dominant post player, definitely want to play through them. You definitely want to have counters. You definitely want the offense to keep flowing and not get stagnant because it's going to one player all the time. Let's flip it now. Let's talk about having no post players. So you've got maybe 3-4 men. You just don't have great back to the basket post players, which I think a lot of people have, that situation right now where it's not a dominant back to the back post player. I know what do you do in this scenario? How do you change what you're doing? How do you make sure that you're getting what you want from the offense without being able to throw it down into the block and feel confident something good's going to happen?
Well, this is a classic. Don't try to fit a square peg into a round hole. And you got to be adaptable as a coach and play to your strengths. And so if you don't have a dominant post, and you maybe have been a rim runner transition team your whole career, but you might need to say, hey, let's run the corners, let's space the floor, and let's open it up for penetration and kickouts. So if you don't have a dominant post, play to your strengths and do something different. Or maybe you have a post player, TJ, that's not, a throw it into one-on-one player, but they could be a big-time screener, a big-time offensive rebounder or tap-out player. And so whatever they do well, build them up and speak that into existence and tell them, hey, you should be setting 15 screens a half. You should be getting to the paint on 90% of our shots. Or maybe it's 100% of shots. I want 2 feet to the paint. And I know when you get 2 feet to the paint, you're going to get 5 offensive rebounds. You can get players to buy into that role and get a lot more out of them than just saying, hey, we're not going to play through you. Go figure it out. You got to get real specific in your coaching and what you're going to ask them to do.
Yeah, the thing I think is most important to do when you do not have a post player is to figure out how you are still going to play inside-out basketball. And I think a lot of times, the answer I see when a team doesn't have a post player is, oh, we're going to run, we're going to gun, we're going to shoot a lot of threes. And it's not bad. I'm not against that. But there's one caveat to that, is that are those threes coming inside out? We've tracked this year over year with our team, game over game. And I'm talking about 98 out of 100 games we played, we shoot a higher percentage from threes on the inside out threes than we do just windshield wipers around the perimeter threes. And so I want inside out threes. And if you have a dominant post player, I mean, the solution's a little bit easier. You kick it in there, they double, you kick it out, and you shoot a three. You kick out an offensive rebound, or whatever. But those are the only way to get inside out threes unless you get penetration into the paint. But how are you going to get inside out threes if you don't have that dominant post player? And so that could come through penetration. That could come through posting up guards. That could come through Barclays, where a guard drives it and turns in post. Like, you can get kickouts a lot of different ways. You can even just post up players for the look. I mean, you just post them to get the ball so that you can play inside out. Like, the defense is not as good when the ball is below them. I mean, everybody does shell drill. The ball goes around the perimeter. You jump to the ball, you help, all that kind of stuff. But people don't work on a ton when the ball goes down in the post. Where does everybody at? It's hard to get out of the habit of turning your head to look at the ball. Defenders are not nearly as good when the ball is below them as when the ball is in front of them. And so you have to have ways to play below the defense, to play inside out basketball. And so the first thing I'm going to ask myself, if I have no post player, because if I have a dominant post player, I know how I want to play inside out basketball. If I don't have a dominant post player, I'm going to have to find creative solutions to playing inside out basketball. What I don't think you should do is just abandon any kind of post touches. I think there's got to be a way to get it in there. There's got to be paint touches. Paint touches lead to good shots. And so you have to be really intentional to get paint touches if you're not going to throw it into a post player very often.
Well, shoot, go to YouTube and type in split action Golden State, and you'll see them throw it into Zaza Pachulia or Draymond Green and get all types of split action with pop, screen and step back threes, or Iguodala or Sean Livingston cutting to the rim and getting layups. Because you're right, teams don't train it even good defensive teams. I mean, just thinking about what you said, I'm thinking we don't do a lot of shell drill anymore on defense, but you don't work on the ball hitting you don't even have to hit the post, coach. I mean, just throw it in the short corner or go into a Barkley, go watch Villanova play, and they get tons of inside out, kickouts. And by the way, when you Barkley with your point guard, who's going to be your better passer, they're going to find those open players. So you got a better passer now in the post. So I think posting up point guards, I just did this in travel ball. Our point guard was a beast posting up. So we tried to let him Barkley down there or run action to post him up, because he was a great decision maker and he could play back to the basket. I know everybody doesn't have that, but you can train your point guards can play in Barkley action a lot. Even if you've never worked on it and you just started doing it, you'd be surprised how quickly they would pick up on it, because they're just natural playmakers. So I think that's a great point on the non-dominant stuff you can do.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, people have done a good job of solving this problem. I mean, you mentioned several, but three come to mind for me. Like, Golden State throws the ball down in there to below average post players play split action. That's one really good example. Villanova uses the Barclays to get guards into post up situations. Another great example. A third one is like Bo Ryan, when they ran the swing offense back in the day, they were cross-screening guards all the time back to the ball, and they were posting guards playing inside out with those guards off cross screens. And so Wisconsin played in a national championship. Villanova won a national championship. Golden State has won championships. And if I was to ask you about all of those teams, they had an okay post player, but they didn't have Shaq. They didn't have, people like that were just bang out post players. Even Wisconsin had Kaminsky or whatever his name was, a really good passer, decent scorer, but he wasn't just a dominant guy down there. And they played through him and the guards in their swing offense, and they did that without him as well. And so I think when you think about solving that problem, there's some good examples out there of teams that have solved that problem of getting touches down there where the defense has to play inside out.
Absolutely, yeah. So you don't have to have a dominant post player to be effective in the paint or in your offense or out of the post. And you'll naturally, my last point on this, TJ, you would naturally attract a couple things on non-dominant post ups. You're going to attract a second defender, double teams, or you're going to attract a lot of ball watchers that lose sight of their man or woman. And then you've got weak side cutters and you got weak side space up shooters. So that's what's going to happen when you post up players who aren't as dominant, because teams just aren't disciplined enough to stay home or to keep their head on a swivel.
Yeah. And all of that leads to good offense. And so let's talk about the third one, Sam. And I think this is a pretty common category for coaches is, maybe they have, the bigger player on their team, maybe a volleyball player or a football player or whatever, but they're not necessarily a dominant basketball player. So you really don't want to play 5 out with them. You really don't, think that you can play, on the defensive end, you want a big post player in there or a bigger player in there. But on the offensive end, you want to hide them a little bit. So you just got that in between. So it's not a dominant post player. It's not an absolute no post player, just kind of an in-between post player. What are some of the keys? What are the things that you're thinking about? And I'll start us off here. I say this all the time, like every player's ROI needs to be positive. So return on investment. What are they doing? What actions are they running to ensure that it's positive for the team? It doesn't always have to be positive for them, but it has to be positive for the team. So let me give you an example. If you have a non-scoring post player that can't finish when you throw it to them, can't post up, can't whatever, but you leave them around the rim all the time, they just sit there on the block to block. Is there likely to be a really positive ROI on that? I don't think so. Yeah, maybe they can get a couple offensive rebounds or something like that. But the reality of it is, if you have some good guards on the perimeter and they're always clogging the lane, they're not moving, they're posted up, and their defender is always sitting there waiting to help, you're taking away buckets from other people. And so I want a post player that's not going to be a scorer, not going to go get a bunch of buckets down there. I don't want them taking away other opportunities. So it's one thing for them not to be able to score it down there. It's another thing for them to be taking it away from somebody else. And so when I think about that type of post player, I'm trying to create ROI for them and for, more importantly, the team. How can I create that for the team? And even if theirs is just a break-even scenario, how is the team going to best operate in a way that doesn't let them take away points from us? So I always think in terms of ROI. Each player, whether that's a wing, perimeter, post player, whatever, is their ROI good? So if I have a wing player, in this example, and all they do is space the floor and hang out around the three-point line, is their ROI going to be good if they can't shoot it? It's not going to be good. What do I want them doing? I want them slashing, cutting, offensive rebounding. I want them doing things that help the offense run well. And that's not the easiest thing to figure out, but I think that is the equation in front of you when you have a post player that is not going to be a plus guy down there. It might even be a minus if you just leave him on the block the entire game.
100% agree. I see this a lot at the youth, middle school, younger high school levels when getting on court with players that haven't been taught, and they're bigger players. You know what they do? And you watch them play offense. We'll play 4-on-4, 5-on-5, whatever. They do exactly what you're saying. They just kind of roam block to block. They follow the ball, and the offense, it gets completely stagnant because they've taken away driving lanes. And when they get it, it's usually a turnover. And so where you place that player is really important. Whether you stick them in the opposite short corner and you make life really simple, kind of like a dribble drive action where they're going to, loop under and you can just catch and lay it up, but putting them out of the way is really important. That not coaching them at all or not giving them any direction, you're going to have a negative ROI for sure. So I think that's a really important point you made.
Yeah, and so how do you do this? I mean, what do you do with that particular post player? Let me just give you an example. Let's just say that you just randomly sprint them out to ball screens. 4 times a possession, they just randomly sprint out to a ball screen. Well, okay. You go out, you screen a player that you don't even want to get a ball screen. What can that player do? They can just kick it to another offensive player and get a drive off of that. And what did the post player who go in to set the ball screen do? They took their man out of the play. They took him out of the help side. So essentially, the ball screen person who's setting the ball screen is the post player, and the other one receiving it just kicks it to a wing. You just took two defenders. You took four players out of it, two offense, two defense out. Now you're playing 3-on-3 basketball. That's better than playing 4-on-5. If that offensive player can't score, that post can't score, you're better off with 3-on-3 than you are 4 offensive players versus 5 defensive players. So I'm not saying just sprint them around the court and get them on, but you want them moving. You don't want them easy to identify. You don't want them sitting in the block the entire possession. Maybe they flash high post, set back screens. Maybe they sprint into ball screens. You want that person to have to be accounted for at all times. They sprint up, send a back screen, hit the offensive glass, sprint into a ball screen after they set the back screen. You can do 1,000 things with that player, and that's where you can get creative in your offense. But the one thing that you can't do is just sit them on the block. And if you just ran them into ball screens every other pass and everybody just played like they weren't even there, you don't even use ball screens, you would be better off than just sitting them on the block.
Yeah, I think you named 2 of the 3 that are the 3 that I have would be put them in the high post, make them a screener, a ball screener, or make them, when they step out on the perimeter and they're a swing and cut, or they're a swing and screen player. They screen the ball, they cut really hard, which can suction and collapse the defense, or they can go screen away. Yeah, when you put them in the high post, then teach them how to set great screens or shuffle cut screens and have cutters running off of them and clipping up defenders. So, yeah. Give them a role. The worst thing is don't give them a role and let them wander out there and kill your offense.
Yeah, one year we did this. We just called circle the post. And on the left block, they would post up and ask for the ball because we would want to run split action. Sometimes we would throw it there. Sometimes we wouldn't because they might or might not catch it. So we wanted them to be wide open. All right, well, on the next pass, they would go to the high post, act like they wanted it. We wouldn't even throw it to them. They would just back screen somebody, and we'd occasionally get a layup on the back screen. After they set the back screen, they'd run into a ball screen, and they'd roll to the rim, and then they'd go back to the post spot. And so every pass, they were going from post up, high post back screen, into a ball screen, rolling back down, asking for the ball again, and they just constantly kept moving. So their defender was occupied. Their defender was having to be engaged in action. And at worst, we were playing 4-on-4, which was better than playing 4-on-5. And so that was just one way. We just circle the post, high post, back screen, ball screen, roll, do it again. And so there's a pattern for them in which they can move and occasionally create some offense for us. But at minimum, they weren't killing the offense for us.
Yeah, and all this to me brings to mind, there's so much in coaching and basketball. It goes down to getting players to believe in their role and buy into it and do it really well. I love seeing teams. You see a new coach come into and run a new system, TJ, who a player was lost. They had no role in one system, and then all of a sudden a new system or a new coach comes in, and all of a sudden that player is a high-functioning, valuable part of the team. I see this happen in football, whether you have a new offensive coordinator and a quarterback who wasn't very good, and all of a sudden they're, you're watching like a Tennessee football right now. It's like coaching matters a lot, and getting players to believe in who they can be and who they are is like so much a part of coaching. And I think that's a part of this conversation. Like there's some X's and O's to it, but really it's just getting a player to believe in whatever role that they're going to do and like just sell out to it. And again, see it happen all the time. Another example would be, is it Robin or Brooke Lopez that's the better player, the one that plays for the Bucks?
I think it's Brooke.
Yeah.
Lopez.
Brooks Lopez, TJ, in his first 8 NBA seasons, made one three. And then if you look at his last 4 or 5, he's made 600 threes in 5 seasons. That's a coach coming in and saying, hey, I think you could be a really good shooter. You're going to stretch the floor. And I get it. These are pro players and they get to do it. But that's an example of getting somebody to buy into a new role and do it really well. So I just think that's a part of the conversation. That's kind of my last thought on this piece.
Yeah, I think it's a good thought. I mean, sometimes you're going to have a player and it's 1 year, and how do I best use them to make the offense better? I'm not going to be able to turn them into a 3-point shooter or a dominant post player or whatever. And you just got to roll, and you got to put your team in the best system and strategy you can by the things that we just mentioned. And the other one is a long term. Maybe they're a 10th grader and you've got 3 years to develop them. Can you develop one skill? Can you develop a baby hook? And if they take that away, go the other direction. So now they can be effective on the block. Or can you turn them into a 3-point shooter so they can stretch the floor? Can you give them a skill that will make them effective? And so I think you got to play the short game sometimes and the long game sometimes, depending on your personnel, depending on how long you have them and how much better can you get them. You know, like it's not likely if they're a really bad shooter, by the end of the season, you're going to turn them to a good 3-point shooter. I'd probably punt on that and I wouldn't work on it. But if they're a 10th grader and they've got an okay shot, maybe I can make them a good shooter, respectable shooter by the time they're a senior. And now you've got something that you can work with. And I think that's a really important thing to be able to do. So, yeah, coaches, hope you enjoy the talk on post players. And, you know, we talked about a dominant post player. We talked about no post players and then an in-between post player. And I know that's kind of, you know, putting 3 simple categories around it. And I know there's a variety of post players out there. But it takes coaching to get those players in the right positions. And oftentimes they're a critical part of your offense. They're either going to have to be hidden really well, or they're going to have to be focused on. They're going to have to find ways to use them, or you're going to start from a place where I don't have any and I got to generate some offense inside out from another place. So hopefully that was helpful, coaches, as you're going into your season thinking about how am I going to use my post player this year. If you have a thought or something you like to do, hit us up at Hardwood_Hustle. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Hey, he is Sam Allen. I am TJ Rosine, and we are the Hardwood Hustle.
Thanks again for tuning into this episode of the Hardwood Hustle, where we believe in the value of a coach. Be sure to check us out on Twitter and Instagram at Hardwood_Hustle to stay up to date on the latest episodes and share your thoughts with our coaching community. From the Hardwood Hustle team, thanks again. We can't wait to be with you again next week.